Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. House Democrats have released their findings from the impeachment investigation into President Trump's dealings with the Ukrainian government. The 300-page report accuses the president of placing his personal and political interests above the national interests of the United States by withholding military aid and a White House meeting with Ukraine's president in exchange for announcing an investigation into former Vice President Joe Biden. At 6 p.m. Eastern, the House Intelligence Committee will vote on adopting the report before sending it to the Judiciary Committee, along with a separate report released by Republican lawmakers yesterday. Much of the information in the Democrats' report is drawn from what we heard in public testimony and read in the transcripts of closed-door sessions. But a new piece of information sheds light on the communications between President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Devin Nunes. Phone records obtained from AT&T show multiple phone calls between Nunez and Giuliani associate Lev Parnas, who was previously indicted for campaign finance violations. They also show calls from Giuliani himself and a former Nunez aide now working on the National Security Council. In a press conference Tuesday afternoon, House Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff raised the possibility that Nunez may need to be investigated.
In terms of the ranking member, it won't surprise you I'm going to reserve comment. It is, I think, deeply concerning that at a time when the President of the United States was using the power of his office to dig up dirt on a political rival, that there may be evidence that there were members of Congress complicit in that activity. Now, there's a lot more to learn about that, and I don't want to state that that is an unequivocal fact. But the allegations are deeply concerning. Our focus is on the president's conduct first and foremost. It may be the role of others to evaluate the conduct of members of Congress.
Let's bring in Major Garrett, Mike DeBonis, and Kim Wehle. Major is CBS News chief Washington correspondent. Mike is a congressional reporter for The Washington Post, and Kim is a CBS News legal analyst and a professor at the University of Baltimore Law School. Welcome to all of you. Major, help us understand why this latest development regarding Congressman Nunes is significant.
Well, I'm not sure I can give, in every respect, all of its significance, but let me just point out a couple of parts, and perhaps others on the panel can fill in any gaps I leave behind. It strikes me that when this process began, at least in its public orientation, Devin Nunes, the ranking Republican, called all of it a circus and a sham and suggested if anyone ought to be censured, it should be Adam Schiff, the chairman, because he did something allegedly unethical. He knew who the whistleblower was, met with the whistleblower, did all of these things that, in Devin Nunes' own rhetoric, sounded underhanded or unscrupulous or somehow politically motivated and indefensible. Now we learn that there are very substantial pieces of evidence that tie Devin Nunes, the ranking Republican, to activity which, as Adam Schiff just said in that clip, suggests complicity with someone who was involved in this outside diplomatic effort run by Rudy Giuliani to either dig up dirt or do something potentially nefarious in Ukraine at the behest and for the benefit of President Trump. That means, at minimum, Devin Nunes did not disclose things that should have been disclosed, was accusing someone else of something that, in fact, he may have been doing, and in so doing, created a utterly false defensive narrative, not just for the president, but accusing that this entire process was off the rails because Adam Schiff was the one doing things unethically or improperly, when in fact there is evidence now to suggest all of those allegations were, if not completely unfounded, projections of problematic conduct of his own, and not for the first time. So this, I think, at minimum, calls into question many of the comments that Devin Nunes made defending not only the president, but assailing this entire impeachment process. I'll let others fill in some of the other blanks, but those are things that come across to me most immediately.
All right, so Mike, let me turn to you now. So Schiff did not appear to be at all interested in investigating Nunes himself, but should Nunes be worried about an investigation coming from somewhere else?
It's possible that he could face a House Ethics Committee investigation. I think it's not clear exactly what the wrongdoing would entail. We do know that there's active federal investigations out of the Southern District of New York looking at Rudy Giuliani. I don't know whether they might be interested in talking to Congressman Nunez as a part of that. You know, there's interesting legal questions that get implicated when you have federal prosecutors looking at members of Congress. I think that it's really at this point more of a political liability than a legal liability for Congressman Nunez and House Republicans. I think Leader Kevin McCarthy of the House Republicans is going to have to answer some tough questions about why he had trust in Devin Nunes to be his leader on the Intelligence Committee amid all of this. Did he ask the questions he should have asked about whether he was in contact with Rudy Giuliani? He had knowledge of these activities that the Democrats were clearly very keen on exposing. What we do know is that Kevin McCarthy and Devin Nunes are two very close members of Congress. They're both from neighboring districts in California. Kevin McCarthy has stood by him throughout this Russia investigation, Ukraine investigation. It's going to be an interesting fallout here on Capitol Hill, just inside the House Republicans, to see what happens next.
So, Kim, legally speaking, what sort of trouble could Nunes potentially be facing?
Well, I agree with Major that it's dripping with hypocrisy in terms of the position he's taken throughout these impeachment hearings, not just challenging the facts, but assailing it as a hoax, as outrageous. I mean, he made a speech every morning when these impeachment hearings were opening with a sense of outrage. So that's number one. Number two is there could be some potential criminal liability for obstruction of Congress or obstruction of justice if the argument is that he had firsthand knowledge. He's a fact witness. That is, he could potentially, having spoken to Mr. Parnas and Mr. Giuliani in April, within the time frame that these events took place that are likely to produce articles of impeachment for the President of the United States, he had firsthand knowledge of what was going on, potentially why it was going on. And not only did he not disclose that he had firsthand knowledge, but he took a position that was contrary to the factual scenario that was clearly unfolding before the Congress of the United States. I'm not saying there's a case for obstruction. I'm just saying it's pretty, I would not say he's completely out of the clear. The third piece would be, as was mentioned, an ethics investigation by Congress. The Constitution allows for removal of a member of Congress if 2/3 of that chamber vote for it. That's unlikely, but it could also produce either a reprimand or a censure. And with something like that, he could lose his ranking membership in the Intel Committee, and then politically, the president's defense of sort of, this is not about a quid pro quo. This is not about investigating political rivals. This is really about uncovering legitimate corruption in Ukraine. That becomes harder for the Republicans to uphold.
So, yes, Kim, based on what is in this report more broadly, what kind of impeachment charges could we potentially see the House Judiciary Committee recommend?
We will see obstruction of Congress. Basically, the report is divided into two parts, somewhat like the Mueller report. The first part is abuse of office. So we'll see something along the lines of abuse of office. It's actually, Schiff's intro is quite eloquent as a matter of sort of constitutional theory and history. I'm a constitutional law scholar and professor, and the idea here, he explains why an accountable presidency, a non-corrupt presidency, a presidency in which the office holders required to exercise the power of that office on behalf of the American people and not on behalf of himself, why that's so serious as a matter of the legitimacy and ongoing vitality, really, of our democratic process. So that's number one. Number two is obstruction of Congress by basically stonewalling all the subpoenas and intimidating witnesses. What's interesting is they do not make a specific case, so they don't have a part 3 on bribery. They mention bribery, but do not actually go step by step through the elements that they believe were satisfied under the facts. They say that there was bribery, but they don't go into that in some detail. I suspect we will see a count for bribery nonetheless, and we could see there's some reporting that there might be additional counts or articles of impeachment based on other behavior stemming from the Mueller report. We've also know that accepting interference from foreign governments in an election is a violation of the Federal Campaign Finance finance laws. The president's ex-lawyer and a close confidant, Michael Cohen, is in prison for that very crime that the president himself was implicated in. So we'll just have to see. I think that's a strategic question for the Democrats. Is it better to go broad, or is it better to go narrow, where they have a very clean factual record?
All right, so Major, our colleague Nancy Cortez, CBS News chief congressional correspondent, asked Chairman Schiff about the impact of these phone records on the president's defense. Let's go ahead and play that clip.
Sure.
Do the phone records cast doubt on anything you heard from the witnesses or anything the president has said publicly?
No, they don't. At least that I can identify at this moment. I think the phone records are remarkably consistent with the coordination of a lot of this scheme.
So I know the president is overseas, Major, but what has been the reaction from the White House to this report?
That it's like the entire process itself, a kind of an imaginary crime with imaginary evidence, and the president did nothing wrong. And as White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham said in a statement, it reads like the ramblings of a blogger in a basement looking for a crime where nothing exists. The White House position is, as the president stated today at the NATO meeting, the call was flawless, everything was flawless, nothing was wrong, it should all be over. Well, the public can judge this report for itself, and the minority Republican defense of the president's action for itself. But clearly this impeachment process is going forward. And if Elaine, I could just double back to a comment that Mike made, which I think is really important, about the exposure of Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, vis-a-vis Devin Nunes. When it was being debated within Republican circles whether to add Jim Jordan from Ohio to the Intelligence Committee, he played a quite prominent role. If anyone in our audience spent a long time watching the hearings, it was discussed whether he would supplant Devin Nunes, and Kevin McCarthy ruled against that. So Kevin McCarthy owns Devin Nunes lock, stock, and barrel in this process. He cannot run, he cannot hide, but he may have to explain what's just been disclosed.
Something to watch. Well, Kim, beyond the call records, what other takeaways, Kim, did you find in this report?
Well, I don't think there was any new evidence from, I wasn't able to read every word. It's about 300 pages long. But any new evidence, but we do get, I think, a window into the Democrats' strategy here. As I said, it does not mention bribery, talks at length about abuse of office, explains why this matters for the Ukrainians to get this aid, why it was bad for American foreign policy and national security. They make the argument that this president, according to the Democrats, took actions that undermined national security. So that's quite serious. I think it's important also to underscore a problem with the defense here. The defense appears to be that, well, the president did something that was in good faith, out of a concern with corruption in Ukraine that historically existed, and that's a legitimate thing for a president to do. The problem with that is we have an avalanche of witnesses that are career government officials, experts with tremendous deep authority and experience on these issues that have spanned multiple presidencies. They tell a very compelling alternative picture. Their story does not line up with this idea that this was about undoing corruption in Ukraine. Their story is that this was shocking, this was deeply troubling, some people resigned. So to accept the counter-narrative, to accept the defense, is really to shift American government in a new direction, in a direction where we reject expertise, we reject knowledge, we reject independent thought, we reject policy based on facts and legitimate interests of the United States. And I think that's something to pay attention to in terms of the meta effects of this entire process. Where do we want, as Americans, the government to be in 2, 3, 5 years, even after this president leaves office? Those are the questions that are hanging in the balance in this moment. And I think the report, particularly the beginning, which I recommend readers actually look at, lays out the case for why this is so important for American democracy, not just for this particular human being that's in the office right now.
So against that backdrop, Mike, one of your colleagues at the Post, Rachel Obeyed is reporting that Democrats are quietly debating whether to expand the articles of impeachment to possibly include charges beyond the Ukraine controversy. What else are they considering, and why is this just being discussed now?
Well, in particular, they're looking at the obstruction of justice allegations surrounding what was detailed in the Mueller report, his firing of Jim Comey as FBI director, various actions he took as president to allegedly try and sweep the Russian collusion charges under the rug. That's the main point. But there are some other things out there. In the report today, there's accusations of witness intimidation. There are some sort of ancillary issues around this report that could, be broken off as separate articles of impeachment possibly. But, if you read this report, it's pretty clear that they're focused on very clearly on two separate main areas. One is the abuse of power with regard to the president's dealings with Ukraine. The other is obstruction of Congress, contempt of Congress, and the Stonewall strategy that he has embarked upon over these past not only few months, but even potentially before that, dealing not only with the Mueller investigation and the other investigations that the House has undertaken into his administration.
Major, would an expansion of the impeachment charges be a positive or negative for the president and his Republican defenders?
Well, I would say as a general proposition, no impeachment article against any president is positive under any set of historical circumstances. It's a blot on any presidency, historically, in the moment, and for all time going forward. And I will just say that this debate that is being now reported out in the Washington Post by Mike and his colleagues is consistent with the conversation I had on my show, The Takeout, with Jamie Raskin, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Democratic side from Maryland, a couple of 3 weeks ago, where he said absolutely on the Judiciary Committee he will be a voice pressing for articles of impeachment beyond the scope of the Ukraine situation. He specifically mentioned areas dealing with the emoluments clause, that which is benefiting the president or his business while he is in office. He believes that is a vein that is rich for exploration and an impeachment article to talk about this conduct as not only inconsistent with the constitutional understanding of the presidency, but something potentially ruinous to that office going forward. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. But I do know Jamie Raskin on the Judiciary Committee will be one voice pushing for those kinds of articles of impeachment to, at minimum, be considered seriously by the committee and quite possibly written.
All right, Major Garrett, Mike DeBonis, and Kim Wehle, thank you all very much.